Hi. Okay, welcome everybody. Sorry we're slightly late starting, but it's okay. It's my real great pleasure and honour to welcome you all to the Court Hall tonight to celebrate the publication of Gemma Rolls-Bentley's debut book, Queer Art from Canvas to Club and the Spaces Between, which was published by Quarto earlier this year. And there are copies of it around this evening. Before I start and introduce our speakers, I've got a few housekeeping notes, which are that the event is recorded, and so the Q&A is also recorded, and even afterwards, until that light goes green again, everything is recorded. So if you've got questions and things, or if you've got other things you want to say that are not recorded, then I would advise taking it out to the room, but everything else is recorded. And then also there's a drinks event afterwards, to which you are all welcome, and it is just in the next room in Research Forum as well, where we can continue conversations in a non-recorded way as well. But yeah, it's my great pleasure to welcome and introduce both Gemma and speakers this evening. Gemma herself has worked at the forefront of contemporary art for almost 2 decades, working passionately to amplify the work of queer artists and provide a platform for art that explores LGBTQIA+ identity. She curates exhibitions, builds art collections, and leads projects internationally. Most recently, she curated a group exhibition, Dreaming of Home, at the Leslie Lohman Museum in New York, and the Tom of Finland Art and Culture Festival in London. She also curated the Brighton Beacon collection, the largest permanent display of queer art in the UK. Gemma's a visiting lecturer at the Royal College of Art and has sat on the boards of numerous organisations and charities that support diversity in the arts. In her typically generous style, she elected to share this event this evening with 2 peers and collaborators, the artist Rene Matić and the curator Fiontán Moran, both of whom we are all also equally thrilled to have with us this evening. Rene is a London-based artist and writer whose practice spans across photography, film and sculpture. Converging in a meeting place they describe as rudeness, and evidencing and honouring the in-between. They draw on inspiration from dance and music movements such as Northern Soul, Ska and Two-Tone as a tool to delve into the complex relationship between West Indian and white working class culture in Britain, whilst privileging queering intimacies, partnerships and pleasure as modes of survival. Fiontán Moran is Curator of International Art at Tate Modern, where he works on exhibitions, performance, displays and acquisitions for Tate Collection. He recently co-curated the exhibition Mike Kelly, Ghost and Spirit with Catherine Wood, and is also preparing the exhibition Lee Bowery that will open in February 2025 at Tate, and which I, for one, am much looking forward to. Outside of Tate, Fiontán writes and performs and is the founder of the zine Death Becomes Hair and part of the collective Queer Campervan. So welcome to all of our speakers this evening. And the format of the evening will begin with Gemma introducing the book, followed by a conversation and discussion between all 3 of our guests, and ending with some time for questions and discussions from you, the audience, and followed by the drinks receptions I've mentioned in the research forum, to which everyone's invited. And I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Professor Dorothy Price, Professor of Critical Race Art History at the Court Hall here. So it's my very great pleasure to be chairing this evening, and with no further ado, it's over to you, Gemma.
Thank you so much, Dot. Is this loud enough? Do I need to do something? Oh, yes.
It's on,
okay.
I think.
Is that on?
Yeah, they're on.
Can people hear? Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much for chairing this event and supporting us and giving us a platform and the lovely introductions. And before I start talking about the book, I just want to say a massive thank you to Rene and Fiontán, both part of my chosen family. I'm so grateful that they agreed to join me tonight to talk about the book, but also more broadly this topic of finding Queertopia. Rene and I have collaborated on several projects at this point. Rene was in the exhibition that Dot mentioned at Leslie Lohman Museum of Art, which we can talk about more. and is also in the Brighton Beacon collection. And Finding and I have also collaborated on lots of projects. We were at the Courtauld at the same time, and Finding was the trusted reader on this book, and Rene is in the book. So yeah, they both know the book very well. But I'm just going to start with a little introduction to this book. Some of you may have seen it already, but if you haven't, I'll kind of talk a little bit about how the book is structured and what's in it. But I'm going to start by first of all just saying why I wrote this book. I wrote in the introduction, which I now feel quite shady about because I'm sitting here in the Courtauld, but I basically wrote that I have 2 art history degrees, and I've looked at lots of art in an academic setting and in a professional capacity, as well as in museums and galleries. But it was quite a few years into my engagement with art and the art world that I actually started to really understand that queer art was even a thing, or that art could be so relevant to my identity in terms of helping me make sense of my own identity by finding reference points, cultural reference points, and ways to express my own desires and, I guess, dreams as well. I'm going to get cheesy about it. But yeah, so I studied at the Courtauld 2008 to 2009, and the reason I say I feel shady about it is because Sarah Wilson, who I did my MA with, who's brilliant and a very dear friend, did actually introduce me to 2 of the artists in the book, Franco B. and Isaac Julian, who wrote the foreword for the book. But I think for me what was really lacking in my art history studies was any kind of conversation around queerness or LGBTQIA+ identity within the work. So, so many artists that I saw in my undergrad art history degree at Edinburgh, like David Hockney, Francis Bacon, were making pretty explicitly queer work, but it just was never contextualized as such. And so I think I really missed the opportunity to see myself reflected in the work in that way. And then I really vividly remember when I was about 21, baby diking around London, seeing a Catherine Opie show and seeing some black and white photographs from her Girlfriends series of just really hot leather dykes on bikes, and seeing it in a commercial gallery in Mayfair. It was a show at Stephen Friedman Gallery, who she used to work with, and thinking, wow, that is my world / the world I would like to build for myself, which that is now my world. But back then that was the world I was hoping to kind of engineer for myself. But seeing that work and my own desires reflected in a commercial gallery setting in Mayfair in London that to me felt quite formal, official, I found really validating, actually. And so since then, and having that kind of realization and the penny dropping, and it was around the same sort of time that I was coming out, I've really worked a lot in my professional space with LGBTQIA+ artists, and I've explored a lot of queer themes in my work. And as such, I've had a lot of people asking me in the last 5 years or so, if I was going to get a book that would be a really nice introduction to queer art, what would that book be? And the people that have been asking me that, people who know about art, but also people who aren't in the art world, and perhaps art is a newer topic. And so I was trying to find a book that felt super accessible. I wanted a book that didn't feel necessarily academic. I wanted like a sexy coffee table book, and I couldn't find it, and so that's what this is. And the book came out in May this year, and it's really, the response has been mind-blowing. The book came out in May, they printed about 7,000 copies. In July they had to do a second print run because they'd sold them all, which I haven't done books before, I didn't really know about numbers, but everyone said that was really a good response. But what's been really amazing is since it came out, I've been doing lots of events, and I've been doing lots of different talks and book signings, and people have been coming up to me at the end of the talk and buying the book and telling me stories about why they want to buy this book and why this feels like a meaningful object for them to own. And I've had an amazing, a woman came and said to me, I'm buying this for my trans granddaughter because I want her to know how proud I am of her. I had a wonderful man when I was doing a talk with Simon Martin at Pallant House Gallery, came and said to me, I'm buying this book for my children. He was in his 50s, he'd come out, I think he said he came out when he was 52, his wife and children were being supportive, but he felt that he'd be able to have more nuanced conversations with them using art as a starting point and as a way to navigate some of those more sensitive topics. And he said, I had a brother who was out and who died of HIV/AIDS related complications in the 80s, and I have really struggled with my identity ever since, and it's only since we've had more mainstream queer representation in recent years that I felt comfortable to come out. And so those were two stories. I've heard so many stories like that. I've done a lot of crying when I've been doing these book signings, and I've had a lot of people wanting to buy the book for younger people or older people. And yeah, so I think I had underestimated the potential impact of something like this, and I think I had not really appreciated just how lacking we are in our visibility. And I think, because what I've also realised is because we've got some of these quite big wins, like equal marriage or RuPaul's Drag Race on TV, perceived wins that are all with their own complications. I think a lot of people think that the battles are won and we're not still facing challenges, but the reality is, of course, we are facing many challenges, and I think art can deal with that in really nuanced ways, and can really help us navigate, can just really help us navigate some of those challenges. And so writing this book, I had to think really hard about why I was calling it queer art and what I meant by, firstly, queer and queer art. And so I have included this bell hooks quote in my introduction because when I read this a few years ago, it really helped me make sense of why I wanted to use the word queer to identify myself. I also would call myself a lesbian, a dyke, a queer woman, a gay woman, a queer parent, a mother, a wife, lots of different things. But yeah, this quote, queer not as being about who you're having sex with, that can be a dimension of it, but queer as being about the self that is at odds with everything around it, and that has to invent and create and find a place to speak and to thrive and to live. And I think that reference to creating and finding ways to thrive really resonated with me and with lots of the work all of the work that I've included in the book. So there's David Hockney, and it's really interesting. I included David Hockney's etchings that he made in 1966 and 67 for the to illustrate the Cavafy poems. And I included them in a project I did at the London Art Fair earlier this year. And the London Art Fair is the kind of art fair that's full of David Hockney. You would expect to see David Hockney everywhere. And it was really fascinating hearing all these art dealers and collectors say, wow, I didn't really think of David Hockney as a queer artist, as we were looking at etchings literally of two boys in bed together that he made in the 1960s. And I just thought that was really interesting to reflect on how art history is taught and packaged and how we think about the art that's out there. But then one of the other reason I included this is because what I've realised the more I've talked about this book is that when you say queer art, a lot of people do expect that what you're talking about is literally those two boys in bed together or something that's sexually explicit. But I've included a lot of work in the book that is abstract or is just much more diverse in terms of representation. The book is split into 3 acts: queer spaces, queer bodies, queer power. And I deliberately didn't want the book to be chronological because I wanted to make connections between different artworks through space and time. And I know I, as a queer person, find it very meaningful to feel connected to something that was made 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 80 years ago, or longer. And I think that we see in certainly the way that queer identity is discussed you know, in contemporary culture, but also like socio-politically, we see a lot of repeated patterns, things like the language that's being used. You know, an example that I think of is the way that gay men specifically were spoken about during the HIV/AIDS crisis, and you had words like grooming, and there was a lot of focus on children, and now we're seeing the same language being used talking about trans people within the community, and there's just a lot of kind of repetition, and it feels useful, I think, to make some of those connections through art, through time. So that's one of the reasons I didn't want to do the book chronologically. And so here there was a photograph by Clifford Prince King, and then another one by Sarp Kerem. Clifford is an American photographer, Sarp is a Turkish photographer, and these are in the home chapter. And I was thinking very much about what home might mean to queer and trans people. It might be about a domestic space, it might be about finding a safe space, it might mean moving to a different country to find a different home, or it might simply mean finding ways to feel at home in your own body. We can talk about more of the work as we go through. The subtitle for the book is From Canvas to Club and the Spaces Between, and I was thinking very much about how there is so much queer creativity happening in clubs and nighttime venues, and a lot of the work that's included in the book, or a lot of LGBTQIA+ art, hasn't always existed in galleries and museums. It's perhaps come out of party spaces, bars and clubs, you know, whether that's thinking about pageants or costume or films about the clubs. A lot of work around memorialising those spaces and the role that they play within the community. I talk a lot about how I found myself and my people on a sweaty dance floor, and I know that a lot of other people in the LGBTQI+ community do the same. And so this picture by Ronaldo Rivera was actually just included in an exhibition of his work at MoMA PS1, but he was photographing a lot of the gay bars in Los Angeles in the 80s and 90s, and specifically bars where the Latinx community was congregating. And if we didn't have his photos, we wouldn't necessarily have a record of those spaces, because the bars died along with a lot of their community members. And then Isaac Julian, his film Looking for Langston, made in 1989, is a cult classic. Has been, a lot of people say this is kind of one of the key moments that started the new queer cinema movement. And Isaac wrote the foreword for the book, which I was really grateful for. But watching this film, I've watched it at lots of different points throughout the last decade or so, and I feel like it still feels as relevant now. And we can talk more about this, because I feel like this connects to Clifford's work, and then that connects to Rene's work as well. There's also a chapter about outside. This is a photograph by Jill Posner called Dalston that she took in 1979, I think, and she made a book in 1982 called Spray It Loud. And this was kind of a moment in British politics when there was a lot of social unrest. People were campaigning against nuclear war, housing crisis, women feeling unsafe, and rise in domestic violence and abuse. And this absolutely amazing, iconic billboard was photographed by Jill and put into her book. And then thinking about what queer art might look like if, you know, not just thinking about figurative work or sexually explicit work. These works by Harmony Hammond are called Presences, and she made them by gathering strips of fabric from feminist artists and people that she was living with, and their strips of clothing and bedding, and she dips them in paint and then creates these somewhat figurative sculptures that really take their space. And I just love thinking about all of the queer life and sex and love and living that are imbued into those strips of fabric. And then Joan E. Byron and Lorenza Botner are also in the book. Joan, who's also known as Jeb, made a book called Eye to Eye, Portraits of Lesbians that she self-published in 1979, but it was reissued about 10 years ago by Anthology Publications, I think. But I spent some time with Jeb this summer on Fire Island where she was doing a residency, and she was telling me, you know, she spent the 70s travelling around America trying to find women that would agree to be photographed and included in this book about lesbians. And she said she wanted to include lesbian mothers, she wanted to include black lesbians, she wanted to include lesbian families, older lesbians. She really was kind of painting a picture of like lesbian visibility. But she was telling me, you know, to find people that would agree to be in this book, it was so dangerous and it was so difficult because they were going to risk having their children taken off them, being deported, losing their jobs. And it feels really important to be able to talk about that and you know, put Jeb's work in conversation with contemporary artists. And, well, Jeb is still making work now, but she's 80, she's making less of it. And then Lorenza Botner was a brilliant painter who died at the age of 33 due to HIV/AIDS-related complications, but she painted with her mouth and her feet, and she always centralized her own armless trans feminine form, and she spoke a lot about the Venus de Milo and how that is kind of like idolized as a beautiful form, but her own body and disabled bodies in society are not given the same kind of respect. And this, I just think this is such a gorgeous painting because you can see her footprints across it where she's been walking around the canvas to paint it, but it feels like she's dancing through this rainbow background that she has. And there was a really nice show of her work at the Leslie Lohman Museum as well, which brought her work to lots of attention. But actually, before she died, she travelled around the world a lot with the Disabled Artists Network, and so her work was seen a lot, but it hasn't necessarily appeared in museums until more recently. And then Leasho Johnson is also in the outside chapter of the book. And he's a Jamaican artist who is based in Chicago. And this seemingly abstract work, if you look really hard, you can see that there are black charcoal figures in the work. And the work is called Anansi and the River Maiden, and it's inspired by a myth that travelled along that was orally travelling along the slave trade routes, and it's about the story of Anansi. Some people might know it is a trickster spider, and he talks about this trickster spider being like a representation for like finding psychological space for black queer joy, and the figures that have got multiple limbs, they're all together in the bushes, are painted from his memory of attending like illegal undercover parties where they were listening to dance hall and all the boys working up in the bushes because it was illegal to meet and hook up anywhere else. And then I think this is the last one of mine. This is from a photo series by Zachary Drucker and Reese Ernst called Relationship, and they made these photographs over a 7-year period, and they photographed each other at home as Zachary was transitioning from male to female and Reese was transitioning from female to male, both with a hormone-led transition, and they're really capturing their own journey, but also just what they're capturing is just the transition that occurs within any relationship, any domestic relationship, and it's photographed in this really beautiful way. And again, Zachary is known for lots of her activism, but the work isn't necessarily in galleries and museums that often, and so I felt it was important to put her in the book. Okay, this is almost certainly my last slide. The last chapter of the book is called Queertopia, and that's in the Queer Power Act of the book. And I just really wanted, with this final chapter, to end on actually there is one more slide I've just remembered, but I really wanted to end on a kind of message of hope and just think about how artists are the people that have the potential to think about how we can imagine better worlds, what alternate realities might look like, and how that might help us think about what we can do together in this reality. There's lots of artists in this chapter who are working with digital mediums, they're thinking about the future, they're thinking about different planets. Kaiser von Ziepel on the left is an amazing artist who's based in New York, who makes larger-than-life futuristic lesbians in silicone. She recently had a baby, now she's making futuristic lesbians with their babies as well. And there's just this really gorgeous, hot, femme lesbian visibility. There's a lava lamp strap-on in this one. I don't know if you can see it, but when I see these, it makes me feel really good about the state of contemporary art and what it can do for us.
I was going to say make you feel good about something else. So I was like, all right, Gem, got
that too. And then April Bay is an artist from the Bahamas. She's based in LA, and she invented a planet called Atlantica. It's a planet she's been making up since she was a child. When her family moved to Los Angeles, she said to her dad, why are the kids being mean to me? Why do they treat me differently because of the way I look? And he said, don't worry, it's because we're aliens from a different planet. And she's dedicated her whole artistic practice to this planet. And it's really complex. There is a fashion line called Colonial Swag. There is a whole agricultural infrastructure. And these are the first Atlanticans. And she has a lot of the motif of the nails appears a lot in the work. And Beyonce owns this artwork, which I think is great news. Yeah. And then this is the last one. So this is the last painting in the book, Michaela Ewart-Dan, who's a London-based painter. And this is a very beautiful abstract work. Her work, she recently was announced that House on Worth representing her. The work is all over now. I just think it's really fascinating to see an artist like this kind of have this big market blow up and have the work in museums. And I think to lots of people, when you first look at the work, you know, it's perhaps somewhat decorative in a great way, in a beautiful way. But actually, when you talk to her about the work, all of the colours that she's including, she pulls them from the lesbian flag and the bisexual flag. And these words, how does it get even better, are what her dad always used to say to her rhetorically whenever something was going well in her life, to push her to strive for more. And I just thought that was a good call for action at the end of the book. Okay, so that's me sort of introducing the book for anyone who hasn't read it. I feel like that's a little kind of potted summary. But that's enough of me talking. Let's talk about Rene and Rene's gorgeous work. This is one of your photographs that's in my book. You have a very lovely double-page spread.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the first images of yours that I ever saw.
When was it? 2019?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
And we put this piece, it's a small photograph, and we have we have an edition of this in the Brighton Beacon collection.
Yeah.
There's also one in the Tate, and there's also one in the Leslie London Museum. And so...
And you'd have to say it's in yours. So.
And my wife bought the one for my 40th birthday. That's true. But I have shown this work a lot when I'm teaching, because I think that, to me, when I saw this, I made an immediate connection to Catherine Opie, and actually we put this work in the show at Leslie London Museum alongside Catherine Opie's self-portrait cutting from 1993. And I wonder if you could tell us about this piece, this specific piece, and kind of the story of the people who are here.
Yeah, I don't really, because I normally show my work in, groups. So there's all of these multiple people, multiple things going on, multiple stories. So to talk about one photo is actually a really nice opportunity. This is my best friends, Mia and Campbell. I think it was maybe just before COVID. It might be 2020 actually. We used to go really cuckoo bananas at home during COVID and get really, really, really drunk and snog each other. They are actually a couple. But it's really special. Campbell and Mia crop up a lot in my work, in my photography, because I'm around them all the time and I love them very deeply. And I think that I'm kind of slowly archiving them as individuals, as a couple, and also as my friends. This one's particularly special because it was kind of Campbell pre-transition almost. And since this, I think that the name of this photo is actually Campbell's dead name. And
It is,
yeah, which,
Have we had a long conversation about whether we keep the
yeah,
dead name, whether we change it to their new name?
totally. And Campbell was very happy to keep the dead name. And also, since this photo was taken, they've had the Dyke tattoo covered up. But I think in terms of what you were saying about, like, photography is a way for us to remember that things have existed, spaces have existed before. I think that that's what I'm quite obsessed with. I think as queer people, we get really kind of complacent in our ability to exist in such transitional spaces and spaces that perish almost as soon as we leave them. And that can also be said for bodies as well. And I think that there's this moment here of true love and beauty and friendship and transness, I don't know, that has changed and moved on and, you know, become so many other things that I've since photographed. And it's just really having to remember this moment where we came from and where they're going from then is sick. But yeah, this photo put in the context of other photos by it can create lots of different narratives and stories, especially about England, which is a big part of my practice.
Yeah, we have more images. Here you go.
Yeah.
This is your other page from the book.
Yeah, these are all from a series called Flags for Countries That Don't Exist But Bodies That Do, which is a really annoying long title. I wish I didn't call it that because it's really annoying.
It's a really good title.
Thank you. But it's basically every 35mm photo that I've taken since 2018. Kind of stopped it in 2023 because the relationship that I had whilst taking those photos no longer, it exists, but it shifted dramatically. The romantic relationship that I had ended in 2023. So I stopped that series there because I felt like the love that was the lens that I was looking at from changed, and it's really exciting and gorgeous and sad and grieving and all of this other stuff, but I wanted to put a kind of full stop there to this version of a country that I'd been experiencing, because that's what I say a lot about my work is really about patriotism, and it's patriotism for a country that we create together. And yeah, this little world that we exist in, and it's a lot about love. This is my wife, Maggie. We're still married, but we're not together. That's the relationship that changed in 2023. Moved to a different space that's still beautiful, but Maggie is kind of punctuates the series, along with Mia and Campbell, along with, Kai, Isaiah Jamal, Nadine Noor, who runs Pissy Palace. There's Kai. You know, we were all really baby at these times as well. Someone asked me the other day, oh, what's your work? Is it like youth culture? And I was like, well, I guess so. At some point it was.
So young.
Yeah. At some point it was in these times, you know, we're early 20s. And, you know, we've all transitioned a lot since. And that's my kind of, gaze, I guess. That obsession with archiving these times when, maybe it was youth culture and then it becomes something else and we become different things. But all in this context of this country. But, yeah.
And that act of archiving it feels really necessary because these stories, and I think particularly you talking about that relationship, that romantic relationship having ended and changed, like what a beautiful way to honour that. But then also to think about creating a body of work that really pays tribute to a community, to friendship groups. It was really interesting when I look at these works, you know, I have a response to it because I know lots of the people in the work, but it was very interesting showing a lot of these images in New York at the Leslie Noman Museum where we put a whole wall of them, and seeing young LGBTQIA plus people coming into the museum and saying, wow, that could be my friends on a night out.
Yeah.
And I think there's something special about like almost providing a window through which we can all connect.
Yeah.
There's sort of a power of like, I guess, solidarity or like wider community.
Yeah, I think it's also like just paying attention. For me personally, I've taken photos all my life if I think about it, because I've always been pretty aware of the people that I've attracted in my life, and those people being predominantly queer, and the amazement and the great help, the gratitude that I feel for being in those spaces with them and being brought up by them and bringing them up to now that we have your two boys. But yeah, looking after each other, classic chosen family situation, but there's something, yeah, there's a big generosity to it that I do think, I'm lucky that a lot of my friends consent to this, I don't take pictures of people who don't consent. And also people have changed their minds about photos that have been shown and then we just remove them. It's kind of like a constant conversation about what stories are getting told at what times, depending on how people feel. And yeah, there's sad ones, there's a lot of me crying, like that I've noticed that kind of come up a lot, and I think that I don't necessarily always want to put that image on my friends of that deep grief or sadness, and I do tend to put myself in that place more than I do other people, just because, I can protect myself more than I can protect others. That's a big thing as well. The more the work gets shown, the more spaces we're in, the less I can protect people.
And that's something I was going to ask you about as well there, or I was going to sort of comment on, is the gaze. Like what I'm always struck by with your work is how the gaze just feels like one of love. And I think actually that's really interesting, thinking about that in terms of self-portraits as well. And as queer people, how that is such a key thing, kind of all accepting love is absolutely not a given and is the greatest gift that we can give to ourselves and each other.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something you really do through your photographic process.
Yeah, I feel like I don't really have a choice, that's part of my survival technique. That's like what has saved me. But, I always say, like, I wish I really, really, really want, and this is such a thing that you weren't supposed to, kind of got taught the opposite of at uni, at art school, that, you can't be in front of your work talking about it. And that's true. But when there's photos, I do kind of implore people to remember that it was me looking first, And I think that when you know about, looking, it's pretty obvious that it was me looking first, especially because the angles, I'm only little, you can see I'm looking up and
We should also mention that people can go and see these, a lot of your photographs in person, because there's a whole wall of them in the Tate Britain, in the lovely rehang, and you were the youngest artist ever to be acquired by the Tate.
Yes, I still hold that crown when I'm getting older now. Yeah,
it's about the age at which they acquired the work, so that doesn't change.
That's true.
Yeah. So people can, so people can go and see it.
Yeah.
And this is a really beautiful project that you did last year in Bristol. Tell us about this with the Martin Parr Foundation.
Martin Parr asked me to take pictures in Bristol. I was like, hell no, Martin Parr, I don't know anything about Bristol. And then that's where his foundation is. And then I remembered that I did know something about Bristol, and that was one of my acquaintances from the dance floor, which was Travis Alabanza. And that during COVID, a lot of relationships that we all had really changed or kind of became non-existent when the dance floor wasn't available to us anymore. Meant that those relationships weren't available. Relationships that, where the conversation is really just bodies moving, and that's how you that's the language. Travis and I had that. Obviously, there's the internet, and that's how we kind of stayed in touch. But I decided, because Travis was from Bristol and moved back to Bristol after lockdown, that I wanted to take the opportunity to see what it would feel like and look like to take a relationship of two trans people of colour that began on the dance floor away from the dance floor, because that doesn't, it happens all the time, but it was a really purposeful thing. And so Travis obliged, and we just became friends. I went to see them a lot in Bristol, hung out, took photos, and it was really hard. It was hard. It was, I don't, you know, it was hard to be comfortable with somebody that you haven't done that with before. And like I say, all the people I take photos of, I'm really in love with these people, really platonic, romantic relationships with them. And slowly through the use of photography, Travis and I became that. And yeah, we're just like really close now, and they look after my dog and they stay in my flat, and we've been on holiday together. And
but that's really interesting, isn't
Really
it?
cool.
Thinking about how you are normally photographing the people that you love, and then for this specific project you were kind of pushing your own practice.
yeah, I really didn't want to do it at all. But then, and Travis didn't want to do it. There was this point of like what the fuck are we doing? Why do we do this to ourselves? But it really worked out, and fell in love through that. And it was because it's just about trust. And you're trusting someone. I'm asking to be trusted.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an amazing way to get to know somebody. So and that project is continuing, and Travis is going through lots of different things that I'm continuously photographing, and so it's kind of become part of a new language. It's still bodies moving in a dance floor, but cameras there, and there's all this stuff that's like out of language almost. These tools where we don't actually have to converse. We're really good at doing that as queer people, I think. Some things are a bit too heavy to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and you can do it through the work.
Yeah.
And then these are some more images that I think these were from your chapter show actually in New York, weren't they?
Mm-mm.
Are these in Tate?
No, this is Arcadia Missile.
Oh.
Some of them are Tate. But Black Lives Matter 2020, there's Mia again, who was the person who was snogging Campbell before. That's my brother and his girlfriend. It's just lots of, these layers, really layering up, getting an idea of a world.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm obsessed with. And, sometimes, or most of the time, that world is very contradicting. And I think that for me is a real obsession, because it contradicts like the power dynamics and the oppressions that we're facing. So it's like just evidence, it's evidence of a life, multiple lives, and evidencing of surviving or not surviving sometimes, but doing something, breathing. I don't know.
And you paint a slightly different picture every time, because it's kind of like a mix and match situation with the photographs.
Yeah, and that's always based on how I'm feeling in the week.
Yeah.
Like, whoever I've fallen out with, they're not going out. But yeah.
Wait, I realise, where is I feel like we're missing a slide. A Deutsche Bank slide. Okay. I know, but okay.
We don't come back to it.
We
Talk to Finding.
Okay, let's talk through some of Fintons, and then we'll talk about your recent project. Okay, so Findon, do you say be quick?
Yeah, really come on.
No, talk about you.
Let's hear from both.
Is this mine? Because I'm really reaching over you like this,
Yeah.
talking. Sorry.
So, Findon, when we were at university together,
We actually weren't.
no, we weren't
You
actually.
lied. So
Yes, I did.
I was unemployed.
Findon did the BA graduating in 2008. I did an MA starting in 2008. But you were hanging around
Yeah.
a lot and still making the student newsletter,
Yeah.
luckily for the cohort and for all of us students. And in fact, one of my greatest moments in life was when I was able to be on a double-page spread arm wrestling Natalie Silovich. Really hard.
Hey.
Yeah.
Who's now a curator at the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw.
Yes.
Oh boy.
And still hot.
That's
And lesbian arm wrestling is even more of a thing now than it was then.
I can't be moved for a lesbian arm wrestler.
I know.
They're everywhere.
So tell us about this project, because I feel like this is one of those things that was so scrappy. You were just doing it. You really had like a vision, and some of the stuff that you put in here was quite radical at the time.
I don't know about radical, but it was just
I think it
something
was.
to do.
At an institution like the Courtauld, which certainly in 2008 felt extremely traditional.
Well, we had Sarah's
We had several.
and many other great people.
Yeah.
But it was mainly just it was called the newsletter, but there was no news in it. It was just pictures of Madonna, overheard in the cafe, inappropriate things people would say.
Yeah, news.
Who was the most stylish person of the week?
Gossip.
A real takedown of some of them.
I never did the takedowns, but I did.
There were some.
I did publish.
Yes.
So I had some enemies.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of, because the Queertopia is so small, and I have to say it's really such a pleasure to come back to do this, because the Queertopia was a very special place for me when I was studying, and meeting Gemma made a massive difference to my life, I would say. And
That's nice.
and many of the people I met at the Queertopia. And I think it was just a product of like having friends, making friends finally, and wanting to just throw stuff together. And I always loved zines, and one of my favourite things to do was for Valentine's Day, because at least when I was at the Queertopia, it felt a bit like a monastery. No one really got off with each other, but so I hope that's changed. So I put bots in the cafe for Valentine's Day, and people could put in their Valentines, and then I would publish them in the magazine. But I just included it here actually because just as an example of how something I did just off the cuff somehow found its way into the hands of a curator at Tate Modern, through James Bowden actually. And then through that, I ended up getting an internship. I had applied for an internship there, and I didn't get it. But then I then really kind of then got the next one, partly because they thought my sensibility would match the exhibition they were working on.
Wow.
So I'm just saying, just do the things you like doing, not to preach.
But I think that's a really good practical tip for any students. It's like, actually, you might get a job at Tate Modern.
Well, I don't think so. It's not a policy. But it's also just about finding ways. I mean, just hearing you talk about how you had to search out queer histories, I was trying to think of what queer material was taught to me at the Queertopia, and actually there wasn't really a great deal. And Mignon Nitzing and James Bowden's course on American art had some elements of it, especially in relation to experimental film and Warhol, and then Sarah Wilson's performance art course, which I did. But it was very limited. And I think I didn't really question that.
No, and I didn't either really at the time.
Yeah, but luckily I was surrounded by people who kind of inspired me, and through going to especially Stuart Comer's film program at Tate Modern, who was really was kind of a special place for me to go to by myself, and to see so many amazing experimental queer filmmakers was a really important moment in my kind of education, really. And so I think that was kind of more the start of my education on that side, as well as Madonna Set's book.
I have thought a lot about, as I was doing this book, why I personally didn't question things more or seek them out more. And I have definitely reflected on how that was about my own relationship with, I hate to say coming to terms with, more it's finding joy with like my identity, my own identity. And, I think I had such a complicated relationship with shame, because, 2008, it's really not that long ago, but things were so different. We have seen so much change in the last couple of decades in terms of LGBTQIA plus visibility. And, I think not having those things talked about or not having space for them, it just almost, I think to me, I internalized it as just an endorsement of this idea that something was inherently wrong with me anyway, actually. And one of the most moving things that's happened since this book came out was that Dot wrote me an email saying that she had bought copies of this book for the Courtauld Library so that no other student had to experience that same lack of visibility, which I think is great. And I know lots of universities have now got it as well, but it's interesting to hear you also say you didn't, question it. But you were talking about...
I think it maybe was also about how you were taught art history and about your subject position. And I always felt, or at least, I can't remember if I was officially taught this, but there was always this sense that you weren't meant to put yourself in your writing or you're meant to be subjective, or the type of analysis you're doing is very formal. So it's, and obviously art history has progressed very dramatically, and it had already when we were studying, and I think that connected to my own insecurities around my sexuality, that I didn't have to deal with the kind of messy reality of the artist's lives, because you're not meant to, or you're not meant to project, or you're not meant to rely on biography too much to talk about the work. And I think, and I think that was maybe why I didn't question it so much.
Yeah, your own biography as a writer, art historian, but also the artist's biography.
I mean, these are just some slides. We can probably go through them quickly, but David Hockney is obviously a very, I guess, obvious gay artist, and the first show I worked on at Tate was called A Bigger Splash, Painting After Performance, and it was kind of using Catherine Wood. It was with Catherine Wood, who was at the time the performance curator, and she kind of used it as a Trojan horse to bringing performance into an exhibition space. And she really liked the fact that David Hockney spent 2 weeks painting the splash bit, whereas Jackson Pollock just flung the paint on the canvas. And she kind of thought that embodied a certain kind of camp, queer kind of sensibility, that the kind of labour and the interest in creating something very artificial and intentionally artificial that's meant to represent something so transient. And the key kind of comparative work for that was Jack Hazan's film also called A Bigger Splash, which was made in 1974, so like a decade later, and it's basically a bit like Made in Chelsea, because it was a constructed a constructed reality film, and it kind of makes up a fake storyline that David Hockney can't paint because of his breakup with the beautiful Peter Schlesinger, and it's not true. And David Hockney apparently was really upset with the film and tried to buy the negative back, but luckily he didn't. But what's great about it is that you kind of see how David Hockney is painting and making art in a world. It's a world of Ossie Clark, Celia Birtwell, Andrew Logan, and these people creating paintings, creating art, creating fashion that creates an environment for them to exist in. And I think for me that was really eye-opening, and very often it's been performance and experimental film that's kind of given me a way to think about how you can bring queer subject matter, or just bring a more broader view of the world into the space of art and the space of the museum as well.
And that's something I think I've learned a lot about from you, is just like queering the institution and some of the projects that you've brought in. There's a slide in here about Charming for the Revolution, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
This was just...
Could you tell us about this first?
The first show I ever went to in my life was the Warhol show in 2002. And then I got to work on the one that opened in 2020, but then closed a week later because of COVID. It did reopen, but what was interesting with the 2020 show is the fact that we got to include this lesser-known series called Ladies and Gentlemen, which is where Warhol painted a group of trans women and drag queens, but they were never named, and Warhol didn't really know them that well, so it kind of opened up an interesting question around Warhol's own relationship to a certain queer community that he wasn't part of, although he obviously was part of his own community, queer community. And one of the sitters was Marsha P. Johnson, who since the time that the painting was made, obviously has become very well known and is an icon. But thinking about that trajectory of who the icons are within a kind of history changes and develops, and how we can somehow bring that into the space of the exhibition of an artist who's very overly familiar and in some ways almost become quite boring for some people. So that was one important kind of element of that project. And then I think, but one of the most magical projects I worked on was in 2012, Stuart Comer got my contract extended because I was on a temporary contract. And so I could work on this event called Charming for the Revolution, a Congress for Gender Talents of Artists, maybe queers and long titles.
We love it.
Yeah. I feel like this weekend changed my life and really changed how I thought about myself in relation to art and what the museum could be a space for. And actually, I'd completely forgotten, but I took the person I was dating to this, who actually you're now in a relationship with. True traditional messy lesbian style.
Absolutely. Incest of it all that goes on.
And, but it was kind of like this moment for me where like everything came together, and like the museum could really be a space to explore through an academic and artistic lens, like some of these like major like identity subjects, that topics that, like you said, were not things that we were exploring just a few years before when we were studying here.
Yeah, and I think, talking about pronouns wasn't the thing, at least not in my environment, and definitely not in the museum. And because I think from that, having that art history background, it was very exciting to see an event. And it was made up of film screenings, performances, a screening of Bruce Sand's Wildness, which is the first UK screening, and then a kind of a conference, but it was kind of convened by an artist, Carlos Motta, and he got different thinkers to come together, including Jack Halberstam and Terry Tamlitz, who goes by the name of DJ Sprinkles. And it was just quite refreshing to actually, have artists come together to talk about the question of gender, and that's the event, and that's the kind of creative endeavour.
And Della Grace Volcano was there too.
Yeah, I mean, it's in hindsight, I wish I kind of soaked more of it up, but I was just worried about pushing down the stacks of chairs and not letting the wheels get away, which they was. But interestingly, we put temporary non-binary signs on the toilets, and they were ripped down by someone. We don't know, but it's also a reflection on it, very interesting in terms of thinking about the question of toilets and how the museum as a space can hold that, and what in 2012 we were trying to do as a temporary kind of gesture just for that event.
Yeah.
And I think I hope that Tate at least has come some way to kind of reflecting people's needs a bit better.
But I think that was very rare at the time.
Yeah.
For Tate to be doing that.
This is just the work that's on display now, just to promote things on display on this tourmaline, and it's just another example, I think, of queer artists trying to create, well, just creating art, but the art is also reflecting on the lack of archives, the lack of history for a history of trans representation, and is also a way for all of us to, whether you're queer or not, to actually think about how we write history and how we kind of forget about things, and also the importance of trying to create a sense of understanding of who we are now in relation to the past. And I think, when I was thinking about this talk, I always go back to the Jose Esteban Munoz Cruise in Utopia book, because he always spoke about how queerness is not here, it's in the future. It's kind of an ideal utopia space that you can never fully get to, and I think that's always kind of stayed with me, this sense that it's kind of an awareness that the present is not good enough, and it's the kind of a continual working towards something. And I think this work in some ways makes me think that as well.
And that book, I mean, I went back to that book a lot when I was putting together the Queertopia chapter of my book as well, because I was really thinking about that.
So could you speak up, please?
Oh yes,
sorry.
Yeah. Thank you for telling us. Yeah, I was going back to that book a lot when I was doing the Queertopia chapter of my book, and thinking, because I wanted to kind of end on a note that took us into the future. But also what you just said there as well about like how we write histories, that's something that I had to think about. Not so much because my book starts really in like 1969. I took Stonewall as like a loose starting point for when we kind of, because that was like the birth of the global pride movement, and that's when we saw queer art kind of begin to thrive, I suppose, in a certain way. But thinking about how artists may have identified at the time, or how we might project certain identities onto them because we now have got different frameworks and language, and trying to do it in a way that feels respectful but also relevant. I think that's something that just requires constant thought with art history. What else have you got on here? Oh, yeah.
I mean, probably whiz through these, but I don't know what I'm going to say.
This is also in the book, and
yes.
I think one of the most important things to say is that this has been going since 1972, started in Andrew Logan's studio, most recently was at Shakespeare's Globe, and you came second in it. No, because that first one was like a token thing. You were actually second.
But, I mean, interestingly, the very first one is briefly seen in the film A Bigger Splash, the 1974 film. It's only maybe 30 seconds or something. But it was actually Rosanna who told me about Andrew, and I interviewed him, and I managed to include some of his photographs in A Bigger Splash. In terms of just thinking about this more expanded way of thinking about painting, thinking about makeup as a form of painting, and just the alternative as well, just the title tells you a little bit about, what to expect. It's kind of come up with 3 looks, but it was another kind of key part of especially London history that I didn't know about, and discovering that, and felt that Derek Jarman competed, and Divine hosted, and this kind of long history, and the way it also blurs the line between the art world, film world, whatever world you want to call it. And
I think it's interesting thinking about you as well and your curatorial practice, but then also, the next one is good because you are a curator at Tate Modern, but you also are a performer, you've made magazines, you make magazines, and you've done a lot of organising, and I think your creative practice, I would call you, I really hate this when I say this, multidisciplinary. You are multidisciplinary.
I just said I hate that word a bit.
I know. I didn't use it to describe you,
Thank you.
deliberately.
I like discipline.
Okay.
I mean, this is more really. I've never actually asked to do anything. I've been quite fortunate about people asking me to do things, really. But this project Campervan, I just want to spotlight because my friend Samuel Dweck was studying architecture, and he was really interested in how many queer spaces have been closed in 2016, and so he wanted to think about how can you make a queer space that can escape gentrification, and he thought of thinking about, if you think about Hedwig and the Angry Inch and the travelling kind of bus thing. So he got an old caravan and then cut into it and then hinged the wall of the caravan to make a stage. There was no health and safety approved, which I kept mentioning, so well trained by Tate. And basically we did loads of different performances and hosted talks at different venues in London, and then we actually went on a European tour of 5 cities. But it was, again, really one of those things that just kind of happened organically and naturally, and there was this weird moment where it ended up being at one of the Tate Lates, even though I said I didn't want to be, because I didn't really like blurring my work life, my private life, but in the end I ended up dancing around to Kylie. But it was also a lesson, basically it was a lesson to me on a personal level to kind of think actually about how you don't need to be so rigid with these kind of barriers, and actually they can actually inform your work in a positive way and actually inform your department even. And I've been at Tate for 11 years, and in that time it's changed quite dramatically in terms of many of these questions that we're discussing around how we think about inclusion of all different types of identities, and through that my own sense of self has felt, I felt more comfortable in myself, I guess. And so I think this project was part of that, and I think also interesting in terms of how queer material and studies has become mainstream, and how you can find ways to kind of question that mainstreaming as well in terms of drag culture, and also kind of the importance of queer spaces, and the museum can be like a space for that, and for me growing up it was a really important space, but obviously museums can be really intimidating, and if you don't grow up going to museums, you might not feel comfortable, so they're not perfect. It's kind of interesting to think about how those spaces kind of operate, and the rule and the unspoken rules around them as well.
And there's a lot of interesting blurring, I think, that happens, and I think both the things that both of you work on kind of really are part of that. But like, so this, when did you start this? 2014. So that Amy LeMay, who's the Night Czar, and she still is, was the
Just resigned.
Okay, was the Night Czar, commissioned a study that looked at the gay bars and queer venues in London in that decade and revealed that over 50% of them had closed in that time. And actually the numbers looked very similar in New York as well. And I think other kind of major cities, major Western cities, were seeing queer venues, particularly nighttime spaces, closing because of lots of different things, gentrification. COVID later definitely exacerbated a lot of it. But it's interesting to see how museums sometimes, I think, I see it as a bit of a sort of stepping into a bit of a void and creating alternative spaces for LGBTQIA plus stuff. But then also, you know, with someone like you, Rene, you're bringing the club and the nightlife into those spaces.
Yeah, I think so. I just think both are art, you know. I've experienced like beautiful art in both of those spaces, so it makes sense that they would merge. But I also think it's okay for them not to as well at other times. But yeah, in terms of accessibility, it's definitely an amazing. I didn't grow up going to art galleries, but I didn't grow up going to clubs either. It's just about pleasure, you know. Ajami X talks about pleasure so much from start to finish in practice. Art practice being, you know, the practice of life for a lot of us artists too. So it's just about pleasure through and through. How can we do that? Prioritizing that, I think, is really, really, really important. And I think that the world would be a better place if we prioritize pleasure.
Gemma, seems like a good moment.
For Q&A?
Yeah.
Do you want to take some questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Should we
This is when Fiontán competed in Alternative Miss World and came on dressed as a bed. And the amazing mic drop moment was when he flung himself backwards onto the stage.
Well, it's more your skills as a photographer.
I can't believe you actually
I like.
credited me for taking that photo. But yeah, that's a really funny.
Yeah, if there's any questions.
Yeah, there's a roving mic, so if you could just wait for that before you ask your question, that would be great. Does anyone have any questions for the panel?
It's also fine if not, because there's a drinks situation where you can ask questions too.
Mimi has a question.
No, I don't. I was going to say drink after.
Oh, there's
Yeah.
questions. There's questions over there.
I think the whole discussion about like connecting to the past and past histories and like what has come before is very interesting. And I was wondering in the research of this book if you were looking at archives or were also kind of researching histories that you didn't know about, that you didn't come across through your learning in your work.
Yes, great question. I mean, I learned so much putting together this book. I think when I started, I kind of had a list in my head of who should be in a book like this, but then I really wanted to make sure that the book was representative of people of lots of different nationalities, from different time periods, and so that meant doing a lot of research and finding people that haven't been in other books or haven't necessarily had museum shows. I think, I can't remember how many, but there's something like 75 different countries are represented in the book in terms of where artists are from. And there are also, I think it's about 25 or 20% of the artists in the book are trans or non-binary, gender non-conforming. And a lot of those artists are not artists that are easy to find out about the work of. And so I did. I looked at archives. I worked with a lot of different people. So Finding was very helpful at giving me ideas. The Leslie Lohman Museum of Art in New York, they have a 25,000 piece art collection, all queer art. So I also worked with them. And then, I kind of did a lot of, I didn't want to rely on books and museums and the internet because I knew that not all of the artists would be there. And so a lot of it was actually through conversations with people.
Thank you. I'm going to stand here, then I can make a few minutes.
Hello. Thank you so much for that. That was absolutely amazing. I actually had a question for Rene. I think your work is so beautiful, and I loved everything that you were talking. Sorry, I just dropped my mic. I loved everything that you were talking about in terms of like it being like an outpouring of love. And I thought it was really interesting when you were talking about the Bristol project and how it was forced to begin with in some capacity, but then ended up becoming like growing out of love. And I kind of wanted to know, basically, like when you started your practice, you said you've been taking photographs your whole life, but like, did you set out to make art, or did it become, because like they are so artistic and they're so beautiful, but did it become art when you realised the way that your emotions were translating, or did you set out with that specific intention?
That's a good question, thank you. I always set out to make art because I always wanted to be an artist, but I didn't see the photos as art until 2018, I would say. Or maybe I did, but they were private. And also because I'm so obsessed with images and obsessed with photography myself, I guess, and also like, I like photography for kind of nostalgic purposes, I think. And I didn't really see maybe that mine would be that useful, showing photos in real time. But then, yeah, I guess as I got older and became more aware of the world and my position, my friends and what we were up to, how much we were looking after each other, I think then it became like more of something that I realised was really precious, that needed to be looked after. And I think that showing them or calling it art is a way of like framing it in that way. It didn't have to be shown, you know, and most of them aren't shown. But yeah, I was just grateful to have good people around me that could talk to me about their experiences of the art world and where this work could fit into it, I suppose, on a practical level. Because it's, you know, you don't just decide that it's art and then it goes on the wall of Tate. I've been very fortunate in my proximity to people like Gemma and Finding. But yeah, I would say I don't know anything about photography or cameras, and that's one of the things that I get asked a lot, like, what camera do you use? I'm like, I don't know, have a look at it, I don't know. But I use two cameras, one's a point and shoot that I found in a raffle bin, and another one I just got given it by someone at some point, and I figured out how to use them just because I'm obsessed with taking photos, but they've gotten better for sure. As I understand my own gaze and what the point of my body is, what my opinion is. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but you know, and also I'm not just a photographer, you know, I make lots of other work, I make sculptures, sound, videos, and
multidisciplinary.
I'm multidiscipline, but so, you know, and that's a really nice opportunity to give voice to the photos too. I do have a bit of an obsession with and a worry about photography and what it means for, in terms of trapping people, bodies, or does it capture, you know, there's questions of, am I allowing people to rest finally as they deserve? You know, there's a lot of different conversations about, yeah, what's the word? Politics of photography, I guess. You know, that's a constant thing I'm trying to go over and go over and go over, and sometimes I stop showing photos, I keep taking them, sometimes I stop taking them, depends what mood I'm in. But yeah, going on now, but yeah, I don't know. It only becomes, I guess, art if people think it is, maybe. So it's not really up to me, I suppose. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes, there's
Yeah.
a person in a red t-shirt.
And then there's someone in a white t-shirt too.
Hi. First of all, thank you all. That was really interesting, very informative, and quite inspiring. Okay, it's a weird question because I don't quite know how to phrase it. And there's a lot of I'm in lecture mode, so how do I put it? Artists have the power to react to the world around them, and like you guys said, they have the power to convey a better world, and that's an image that I think people find more palatable, or not necessarily palatable, but understandable. And they're artists are people who have the power to put forward like a tangible idea of the future. And but I suppose what I'm wondering is, art, and this is contentious to say, but some people might say that art becomes better, culture thrives when the economy's down, when there's a war going, whatever, because people react to the world around them and they have something to react to. They're not satisfied, they're not satiated, they're not passive. But do queer people, by nature of consistently, externally and internally being marginalized and being sidelined and having something to react to and having something to resist against, firstly, does that make their work more consistent? I don't know that's the question. The question maybe is, what does art look like in a future queertopia? We've reached a stage where we've moved past pejorative depictions of queer people in cinema and art, in culture, mainstream culture, yes. We've kind of sailed past the whole queer tragedy in cinema thing, it's still there and it's kind of a real bummer. But now we're at this weird corporate, the kind of integration thing where we're on TFL posters and, we're everywhere, we're hyper visible and we're hyper accepted in a kind of post-PC world, I suppose. But yeah, I don't know. What does the future hold for queer art?
Can I just say
One question. Sorry.
I don't have that answer, but I want to say I don't do future, I do present. It's not my fucking job. I do not feel like as an artist I should have give a tangible idea to the future. That's politicians. I'm not a politician, and I feel like, we can inform, but that's a big weight. That's a huge weight, and I don't feel like we should take that on. I also think it's a huge privilege to think about the future sometimes. And that's why I think that my obsession is with present. But yeah, that's a hard question.
It is a hard question, but I do think it's really interesting to think about it, because I remember being taught very much that, great art comes out of great tragedy, like Giacometti's beautiful emaciated forms are a result of the horrors of World War II, and that's great art. And Bell Hooks talks about great stuff happening in the margins, but does that mean people want to engineer marginal existences to make great stuff? Absolutely not. But I do think your question about what is palatable and I think the various contexts that we now find ourselves in are really worth constantly thinking really carefully about. It's something that I come across a lot with my work. As a curator, I'm constantly trying to make a living, and so I'm doing things like books, which make £0 pretty much, and shows, and I do some stuff with commercial galleries, but occasionally I will do brand partnership kind of things as well. And I have to be really rigorous in thinking about the context that I want to put this work in, and if there's a hint of censorship or kind of only wanting what is palatable, you know, I run a mile. But then there are also some instances where I myself, as a curator, someone who's like having conversations and giving voice, will, you know, I will occasionally allow myself to be in a certain position because I know that a lot of the things that I do are, you know, preaching to the converted, like, and there's total value in that, in like making, you know, creating a sense of belonging for the people who see themselves in the work. I think that's really kind of valid, but I also think to you know, find environments for queer art to appear in that are perhaps going to bring people from outside of the community into contact with work that might help them gain a different perspective, even only for the second that they're interacting with the work. You know, I think there's value in that. But in terms of like what artists are making and where do we go from here, I think we just have to wait and see. You know, like we can't, I mean, I'm not in the business of predicting what's up next.
What's hot, what's not.
Yeah, what's hot, what's not. That could be one of Fintern's magazines. But I think it's really, I think, you know, you raised lots of really interesting and valid points. It's lots of things I'm always thinking about as a curator. Fintern, do you have thoughts on this big question?
Well, no, I mean, just people are obviously changing, the world's changing, people don't learn from the past. I mean, you can't, yeah, it's not really, there's no point in kind of predicting. But obviously, everyone hopes people will be nicer to each other and the world will be better. But there's also I think you laid this out a bit in your book, a difference between a queer like utopia or queer vision and queer artists. You know, a lot of queer artists historically can be problematic. I mean, so there's lots of subject positions within that, and yes, difficult times can produce interesting art, but also art can be many different things. So
yeah, and I think it's really important to constantly revisit and think about how we're looking at things. You know, it's like, I think you said Drag Race or whatever, somebody said Drag Race, but like, you know, Drag Race going mainstream has done loads of good in terms of visibility and bringing people in and, you know, having political conversations, but it's also highlighted so many issues and problems, and so you have to constantly look at it. Or like Tom of Finland, as an artist in the book, did so much in the 70s to help people, you know, find themselves and find peace with their identities, but also has some really problematic strands within the work in terms of race and power and Nazis and other things. You know, it's like, I just think you constantly have to look and question. And it's also, I mean, as a parent, I'm constantly saying this to my children who are obsessed with talking about police and goodies and baddies, and I don't know why this is what they learn at school, but I'm constantly saying to them, like, that there isn't goodies and bad, like there aren't goodies and baddies, like nothing is only good or only bad. It's so important to be able to have a nuanced look at things, and you can totally accept that something has good bits and bad bits, and I think that goes for, and it's all subjective anyway, I think that goes for the work and what's being discussed, but also the contexts and where work might appear. That's not really, sorry, that was me going off on a tangent.
I know there are more questions, but we do have to wrap it up time-wise. And I know there was a question there that wasn't answered or addressed. But there is opportunity to continue the conversation next door, because I know also some people have to go and all the rest of it. And the building closes at 9:30, so I think we should probably take it next door.
Hours at the bar.
Yeah, so we can have a lock-in, and Fenton can make some more scenes.
Thank you, everyone.
I just wanted to also say, I want to say thank you to Martina, who was our student assistant this evening. Thank you to Gemma and Fenton and Rene, and to all of you as well for coming out and having a really interesting conversation and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also,
Diego managed to get a really lovely arrangement with Gaze the Word. So if anyone wants to buy the book that doesn't have it, and doesn't want, you can buy it from Amazon and there's a massive discount, but also much better to buy it from an independent bookstore. Gaze the Word are doing a discount, and you have to put in a code, which is Cortal, I think. Make sure you spell it without an H, like I did earlier.
Thanks to Diego too.
Yeah, so thank you for arranging that, that's really nice. I also have some copies if you want to look at them. Thank you so much, Dot. Thank you, everyone.